I'm Dave Sherwood, the CEO of Bibliu. I'm here to introduce you to Campus Convos, the podcast where we discuss all things tech and education. Hope you enjoy it. Please subscribe on wherever you listen to your podcasts, and please give a share to others interested in the space. Hey everyone, welcome back to Campus Convos. Great to have you here, Baz, and looking forward to chatting today. I know we've been meaning to do a podcast for ages.
We have.
But I'm not sure we thought it would necessarily be in like the work format. Maybe we were thinking more about like video games or philosophy or something, but here we are.
That's true. We could touch on that, but only if it's professionally related.
That sounds good. That sounds good. Well, to kick things off, I'm interested to learn more about Vulcan. Obviously, you know, we talk about it pretty extensively every time we catch up. And it's super cool to see your journey this last year or so and how far you've come and what you've built. And yeah, interested to just hear about like what are the main challenges you faced in Vulcan as an early stage founder and that early stage company journey and what you've done to overcome the challenges.
Yeah, well, as you know yourself, building a startup is very challenging. You're trying to build a solution to an important problem in a scalable way and do something that's new. So I'd say there's a few challenges that we really had as a small business. One is the speed of learning. You are often alone in an early stage startup. There's fewer sources of information than in a big company. And it's really important to be learning very, very quickly in a startup. So we really overcame that partly through our business model. In the early days, we did direct to consumer, which was a great way to learn very quickly. We could learn very quickly what consumer incentives were. And we pivoted later to B2B, but actually doing direct consumer means that we had this understanding of our customer problems that we wouldn't have otherwise. We also just talk to loads of people. So I use LinkedIn really heavily, add lots of people all the time, and even talk to competitors and just not have any fear about doing this. I think that's really important to make sure that you're learning really quickly as a founder. I think the other two things are you're just prioritizing with limited time and limited capital. So you need to be getting more capital, you need to be bringing in more people to help you, but both of those things are obviously very challenging. So even now we're a team of 3. How we prioritize our time and make sure that we aren't wasting it with things that we can't work on immediately or we can't improve immediately about the company has been really important. On the fundraising side, the way that I focus my time around fundraising versus split it on the product or sales, and with the fundraising time, focus it on my network, people that already have some information or evidence about me, has been really important to be able to raise money really efficiently so we can, go back to building the product. Yeah, what about you? Does that link with what you experienced in the early days?
I think probably the biggest thing that resonates is what you said about like time and like the opportunity cost, particularly as CEO yourself, right? On one hand, you're trying to like build this awesome product from the ground up. On another hand, you're trying to get customers in, which ties into the product piece. And on the other hand, you're trying to like raise investment and like ensure the company has the funds to keep going. I think all 3 of those things are incredibly difficult, and you could put all your hours into any 3. Trying to like figure out what the right balance is really hard. And I'm not sure there's an exact answer. And there are certainly times where we had come close to the end of our runway, or the revenue just wasn't coming in, or the product wasn't moving along quickly enough. And it sometimes feels a bit like whack-a-mole, right?
Yeah.
So maybe you could explain a bit about like how you narrowed down to the specific area that Vulcan is focused on now in terms of the home energy model. Because when you first kind of embarked on wanting to do your own business, at that point, the idea was quite different. You didn't know that much about the segment you were learning. And this is pretty standard. Like our original idea versus what we do now is almost completely different. But definitely curious to learn a bit more about that.
Yeah, you're right. We changed our idea and our approach quite a bit from the early days to now. And really in the early days, I was attracted to home electrification because it was something I had worked with in BCG back in Australia. Australia is obviously a great place for electrification and self-generation. And a lot of the concepts of why it's such a great place for this translate to the UK, and the UK had a huge problem. So there was clearly a problem and a need. And as you say, I had some ideas about how to solve it, but was really open to learning. So when I first did a direct to consumer business, what I learned was this was something that was really new to the market, and consumers, homeowners needed the right incentives to make these improvements. And with a lack of information and with a lack of funding, people are unlikely to make these very expensive improvements that have these long-term impacts. So we discovered this quite directly. We also discovered some of the challenges with helping homeowners make this purchase decision and quantifying the impacts and the benefits of improvements. We saw that the energy models that were used with software today by professionals today were inadequate. They were imprecise. They didn't save a lot of time in terms of downstream surveys and information gathering. So we could see that there was this process problem as well. So based on that, initially, when I was looking at a B2B business, I was interested in this financing gap and how do you help financial institutions invest in these retrofits? How do you help link consumers with the funding that they need to make these improvements and make it an offer that they will want to accept? In terms of the technology itself, one thing I was really interested in was how could you help give these really fast and accurate impact estimations for retrofits, and how could you remove a lot of the specialist costs that are associated with helping homeowners make these improvements? Because if you have these really high transaction costs, then even if you have financing for people to make improvements, that they're not going to use that financing. And we won an Innovate UK grant actually to develop our own model, which used dynamic energy modeling data sets to provide these really accurate, fast estimates. But then that's actually when we discovered the home energy model. And that's where this speed of learning came in, because as soon as we discovered the home energy model, it was part of a proposed change to building regulations, the Future Home Standard. We saw that this was actually very close to what we were looking for and what we were trying to develop. And because we had just started developing our product, it was great timing to switch to using the home energy model as a core part of our product. I mean, the home energy model is really exciting. It's so new to the market. We're finding we have to do a lot of education of our customers to help them understand how this is useful. But it's exciting building on something that's going to be part of the industry in the future, and knowing that what you're building will be used in the future and will be important.
That makes sense. And it's such an interesting journey you've gone on of like you find one potential business model and then you learn more information, and you also can change greatly from like B2B or B2C, or like let's help finance loans to let's charge SaaS fees. And ultimately, over a longer term, you could probably have multiple of these as business models. But in the shorter term, back to your point on focus, you really need to have like one that you really focus on, you get going really well. A business like yours is extremely attractive to many investors who want to make sure that their investment is helping society and the world in a positive way. What are the key things that you think will impact the world positively in terms of metrics, and how are you going to go about measuring those?
Yeah, as you say, sustainability is something a lot of investors care about, and our core mission as a company is sustainability in the sense that we are removing a lot of waste that occurs in the process of heating our homes, and we are creating a built environment that is much more efficient and removing this huge economic drag from the UK and its built environment. So if we are successful, then we will have homes that are lower cost, both environmentally and economically to heat, that are lower cost to run, and we spend that energy on things which are productive as a nation. So we see this as a real investment in national infrastructure, and our use of the home energy model and the way that we integrate it into other ways to get data from buildings is going to be the way that we quantify the impact of this software on a day-to-day basis. We'll be able to see exactly how much impact the plans that we're creating could generate. And in the long term, as we enable our users to purchase retrofits through our product, we'll be able to see this in action. We'll be able to directly see that we are reducing the carbon emissions that come from our homes, that we are reducing the cost of heating homes and generating this economic impact, which is also really positive, generating these healthier homes. We'll see that very directly with the software that we're building. There's something around how we develop the business as well, which is, we're thinking about the amount of energy that is required and removing that.
I think it's such a clear benefit to society that you will have specific impact investors that are very interested and ultimately will invest. Impact's always been something like, because the textbook side of what BW does is, it helps drive affordability and various other benefits to the student and the university. But we've been more interested in does it impact grades? Does it impact retention? Does it have bigger social impact? And we've done a correlation study to show that there are some of these impacts, which is cool. But we found measuring these impacts can be quite challenging, both in terms of getting the data from the institutions can be quite slow and difficult, but also just looking to prove anything direct. What do you think if we look at the way that the UK government could improve things, both for tech startups, but also for the environment and specifically some of the sustainability areas you've talked about? What do you think the government in the UK can do better and do better to make sure it's the number one place in the world to start a business and is not being outcompeted by, Berlin or San Francisco or other places?
Yeah. It's a good question. I mean, we're both based in London, and I think there's a lot of great benefits from living in the UK. And London's such an amazing place to live. So keeping that vibrancy as a city is important. But I mean, the UK may never fully compete with the US in some ways, and I think that there are some things that it does well and can do better as a climate ecosystem. So there are obviously some great programs that support early stage startups. We're on an Innovate UK grant. We'll also be leveraging SEIS and these types of things which help fill some of the funding gap for really early stage businesses are great. There's of course other things that can be done. In France, a lot of entrepreneurs make use of their very generous policies after you leave companies. I know someone in Denmark who got started on their startup because they have a very generous welfare program. So different countries, I guess, founders find their own ways to fund those really early days when you don't have a lot of capital. I think your question on how can the UK government help with this climate tech area in particular is also really interesting. A lot of people are very interested in how the Labour government can really fund this area and have really clear policy objectives. And it's helpful to have a government that is very clear that they believe in the energy transition and they're willing to fund GB Energy and make that, commitment very clear. GB Energy itself will be very helpful to decarbonize housing, because if you have a low carbon energy grid, then it is typically lower cost to produce electricity, and it'll make switching over to heat pumps make a lot more sense for consumers. At the same time, it's important to make sure that you don't just focus on the supply of electricity and decarbonizing the supply of electricity. You also focus on the way that electricity and other energy sources are used in the built environment. So decarbonizing homes is very important. There's already some policy around subsidies for heat pumps that should likely continue, because they will likely continue to be very expensive as a new industry. There's also a lot that the government can do around insulation and making buildings energy efficient. And that's something that, particularly for fuel poor homes, needs support. The most useful things are probably continuity. A really big problem in government policies in the past has been subsidies that last for a few years and don't have enough time to develop an ecosystem of suppliers and don't have enough time to prove their outcomes. So continuity in these subsidies are going to be really important. But it's going to be, I think, important for the government to get quick wins in some ways, but this is an area where it's tricky to get quick wins. You're transforming a physical environment, so it's going to be interesting to see what happens because I think there's a lot of pressure on the new government to deliver things very quickly, while this is an area that takes time to deliver impact.
A lot of kind of the things that can be done in this space require money, and the UK government is both short on money, but also has been quite clear they don't want to accrue
Yeah.
like larger deficits than they currently have.
Germany has funding for energy assessments, so funding for really deep assessment on each home that helps with accurately creating a retrofit plan. Something like that would be very useful in the UK and could actually help with a lot of downstream private financing of these improvements because then you have really robust impact quantification. If there was one bit of funding that would be really useful in this process, that would be something that would very much help.
It strikes me that because the new Labour government have talked about, wanting to create like great British energy and drive the transition to being carbon neutral and negative over it strikes me that their tech policies aren't particularly sophisticated and in terms of trying to foster the tech sector and to go one step further, particularly in this space of like enviro tech, and perhaps rather than just buying and building power plants, which I guess is a critical part of the whole Great British Energy concept, perhaps they need to be putting more money into and more grants like the Innovate UK grant that you guys received into envirotech because they don't know exactly which companies or which products or whatnot will be the key drivers of the change and the drive to carbon neutral. And therefore, investing in more young companies will not only help stimulate the economy and drive jobs, but also ensure that they're not betting on the wrong thing. And perhaps, match funding, VCs doing impact enviro funding, perhaps doing extra SEIS and EIS for enviro. Like these are things that could tie in with the Great British Energy thing. But they're interesting ideas. And
There's something around the government approaching market failures, maybe, and I think actually governments can be
yeah,
great at investing in fundamental science. So I know that one long-term investment in area of policy is energy from space solar, which is then transmitted to Earth, I believe, with microwaves. But there are some technology problems to be solved as part of that fundamental research in some way. But the government investing in that because it's a really long time horizon, capital intensive program, that makes a lot of sense. Wherever the government can invest in some of these long term investments or market failures, all the better.
agreed. And I wanted to talk to you about the grant side as well, because I know a lot of companies, early tech companies, are interested in grants and maybe don't get them or don't know how to deal with them and end up focused more on the investor side. And clearly, both are good opportunities. And there's no way we would have survived our first 2 years without that funding.
Yeah.
In reverse, we looked at some Innovate UK stuff and maybe we applied for one thing, but it just seemed extremely difficult and costly for a small team to win a grant like that. So it's pretty impressive that you've been able to do that. But maybe you could talk a bit about that experience and perhaps our other founders like us can access that funding.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, it was luck. Luck in the sense that the Innovate UK Smart Grant funding, I believe, has a sub 5% success rate. And even if you use a grant writer, I think you can improve the success rate maybe 30%, but not that much at all. And grant writers are very expensive. You need to pay a lot of money up front. The grant that we went for was specific for net zero digital companies. And it had a much higher success rate because it had very strict criteria. So there weren't a lot of companies that would be applying for that. I think it still had around a 40% success rate. So it was still competitive, but that really helped. And in a sense, that was luck. We were developing this product and company anyway. And the fact that there was a grant available was great, but it might not have been available at that time. There are different grants at different times. I think particularly in the net zero space, there's a lot of grants that are coming out, as you say. There's investor match grants as well, which are fantastic, a great way of de-risking early stage startups for investors. Um, so I would say, I mean, there's luck, but as founders, you have to make your own luck as well. So you have to constantly be out there looking at different sources of funding and yeah, hustling as I'm sure you were to find your grant funding in the early days too.
Exactly, and that's something that I think more companies need to look into. But yeah, it can be pretty impenetrable, both in terms of the success rate, and just the whole process to go through to access the funding, and then
Yeah.
also the fact the funding will come after you've done work, which where are you going to get the cash to actually do the work in the first place? So then you still need to raise capital, and we talked about this in terms of your grant being paid in like pieces. That's
Yeah.
quite challenging. And what about like global warming? How are you feeling in terms of where do you think we'll end up in terms of how many degrees hotter the world will be? And what do you think the impact will be on the world? And maybe specifically like, people in the UK or the average person in the UK.
It's a good question. Uh, I don't know how warm the world will get. There's of course ways we can engineer our atmosphere to mitigate for some of the effects of global warming long term, but that has its own cost potentially. I mean, a really interesting book there is Termination Shock by Neil Stevenson, where they author explores what that kind of geoengineering would look like. But of course, the more we can do to use also our natural resources in a better way and protect the biodiversity of the world, the better. And if our environment continues to change, then we haven't developed the infrastructure for this. We haven't adapted in a lot of ways, and the real negative effects will be on us as humans. So that's why developing things that fix for this problem are so important. Also, a lot of the technologies that are being developed to address this problem are fundamentally more economic. So they use less waste, they use resources in smarter ways. So almost the fact that we have this crisis in front of us is prompting us to look inside and discover these technologies and discover approaches that are better for our environment. So I mean, I think we as humans will be able to adapt to this and we will come up with solutions for this. But of course, that requires active work and effort by companies and individuals. I think we'll only succeed because people are trying to change the way our industries work.
I've read in a number of places that the worst case scenario of like 2.5, 3.5 degrees looks less likely now, and we're
Mm.
headed more somewhere between 1.5 and 2.5 degrees, which is good news in the sense some of the more extreme scenarios won't happen in terms of natural disasters being more common, and impact on agriculture, and all of many of the more extreme examples are less likely to happen. It doesn't mean they won't happen, and it doesn't mean that the entire world is shielded.
Yeah.
Obviously we're already
And a
seeing
lot of the negative
island.
effects have already happened in terms of ocean acidification and the
Yeah,
impact on ocean ecosystems. So it's,
yeah, exactly. But it seems like, and particularly with a product like Vulcan, the average consumer obviously should be looking to vote in a way that can help mitigate this. But also there's a lot they can do with their own emissions, right? Like, and Vulcan's something that
yeah,
can really help with this. It's like a lot of your emissions are your household energy consumption and your transport. And if you look at a product like Vulcan, you can fundamentally transform your home such that it is carbon neutral. Particularly if you pair it with solar, or even just purchase renewable energy from the electricity provider. Obviously, electric cars will become more common, which will help there. And so there is a lot that the average person can do. These things can be quite expensive, but there are increasingly financing options available. I know this is something you're planning to do in future as well, but the average consumer will be able to get financing where actually their upfront costs won't be very much, and the savings they can make each month will be potentially greater than the cost of the financing. So we'll be entering a space whereby there's not really a good excuse not to. Um, And that's really
Yeah.
exciting. It's something that you guys, Vulcan, can really drive change here directly, which is super cool.
Definitely. I mean, we're really excited about the part we can play in energy performance certificates in the future to help consumers make better decisions about how they improve their home and make decisions where they understand the real economic impact and they can finance that impact. And financial institutions will discount lending because they're certain of the impact as well. And I think there's a few pieces that need to fall into place to make that happen, but we're excited to be an important part of that. Uh, but you're right. Consumers and homeowners and all of us can vote with our feet and vote with our actions and change our behaviors. The way you live and the way you drive are two really big levers of that change.
What was the critical point at which you jumped into this, and why? And like maybe some kind of learnings you could share with others that are thinking about maybe starting a business but are not sure.
When I was in Australia, I don't think I had maybe the confidence in exactly what I wanted to build or what path to pursue. I don't think I knew what really motivated me in some ways. And I think it was only through exposure to different industries that I really realized that. And I also realized, I think, some of the limitations that come with being in a big company and being able to develop something that is really innovative. So coming to the UK was a big change that pushed me towards starting a company, coming to the UK and first working in technology companies that you and I both grew up in Perth. When people are starting a business, they're starting a small business. They aren't starting a technology business that's trying to disrupt incumbents and totally change industries and change the way people work. That's not something people really think about doing. But being in businesses that did that changed my mindset about what's possible. And then developing the skills myself, but seeing the limitations of working for other people made me realize I had to be a founder. I just wanted more responsibility in situations where things went badly and things were out of my control. And I think that's the kind of person that wants to be a founder. There's some people where uh, maybe they want some more control and structure around them and they want to be able to not have all that responsibility. But I think a lot of people that are drawn eventually to become founders want to take a lot of responsibility for what's going on around them and their work environments, and that makes them really want to do that. Uh, so in terms of advice, I'd probably give 2 points of advice. The first is once you discover a problem you really want to work on, that's probably the right timing. I don't think you need to know exactly what the idea is. So with my journey, I knew the problem and I think I was quite open as well about not knowing the exact idea. And I jumped into it and I learned a lot about the industry through action. And actually that ended up with me finding the right approach over time. That taking the action, but also being flexible about what I learned. I think the second thing is as a founder, you have a lot of responsibility. You have responsibility for the direction of you, your company, the people around you, and no investor or customer or anyone else really can take that either way away from you in some ways. So this Richard Feynman quote, which is first principle is you must not fool yourself and you are the easiest person to fool. And I think I really hold that to heart. And I think you need to be very intellectually skeptical and really think about what you're doing and whether it makes sense. But it's really fun. So I think, doing those things, taking responsibility, having intellectual skepticism is really fun.
People ask me like, oh, this is cool. I'd like to do a business, but I don't have the right idea. But as you said, and I think often this is the first learning entrepreneurs have, is it's not really about the right idea. It's very rare for the first idea someone has to become their business model, let alone where the business is in 4 or 5 years' time. So I think just letting that notion go is key to starting and not
Yeah.
getting too obsessive about the perfect idea. Certainly want to find an industry or a segment where you feel there's a real problem and it's a big enough segment that even if you're a small software company, you're still very successful. And that you're also interested and passionate about the segment, right? Like
Mm.
there are many areas outside of education that I think I just find quite boring. You're just like oiling or like slightly making something more efficient economically to a small degree. And I just don't think doing that sort of thing for 10 years, I'd find that motivating, to be honest.
It seemed like you knew very early on, even before Teach, Learn, Grow, that education was right for you. So it seemed like it was something you knew quite early, is my sense.
But going from Teach, Learn, Grow to Bibliu, it wasn't like an intentional, oh, I want to definitely, I experienced a bit of, a significant amount of entrepreneurship at Teach, Learn, Grow, which I really liked, but also a bit of software stuff. We got a few exec volunteers to build out some software-y things for Teach, Learn, Grow to help with like recruitment in the tutoring center. And that seemed super cool, and there was a lot of opportunity. But yeah, I was open to different areas, and I settled on a bit like you talking about how your idea evolved. I kind of thought about all the different things that iPhone had done drastically different, and it felt like books hadn't been changed that much. And so I'd settled on books, but not necessarily textbooks initially. I would have like tackled just books in general potentially.
Yeah.
But again, with time, that idea was refined down to just textbooks because you got to focus. You can't tackle every sector at once. Yeah, maybe you could talk a bit about like how you came to be involved in Teach, Learn, Grow, and
Yeah.
like has it had any impact on you at all post Teach, Learn, Grow or not, perhaps?
Absolutely, very positive impact. So I think seeing you set something new up was very exciting because it seemed like university clubs both didn't set up newly and also didn't do new things. Most of the time, they'll do an event and they'll do the same event every year and be run basically the same way. But seeing someone start a new event and then say, I'm not only going to, keep this running, but expand it and grow it and change it was actually very new. So that really excited me about working with Teach, Learn, Grow. And I think because I was working on something that was new, I was really keen to put in more of my time. I spent more time working with you, and I worked with you on some of the sponsorship and the fundraising side, but we also just worked together on a lot of different aspects of the program. And I think it encouraged me that because my efforts would translate into something different about the world, it was worthwhile investing that time. While if I was just in another university club, you're not really going to change anything. You just have to win a popularity contest.
I feel much the same way in terms of like the impact it's had on me. I think it was a bit of a surprise, like you as well. I think originally you'd wanted to be a lawyer, and then obviously you went into
Yeah.
consulting. For me, I'd wanted to do research, chemistry, and having just kind of fallen into Teach, Learn, Grow, this charity that does free maths tutoring. I suddenly realized, wow, managing large groups of people is awesome, and rolling out a new product or service is really interesting and challenging. And the fundraising side, actually, which I hadn't really thought about, was also not only a lot of fun, but I feel like those skills we developed in like
Yeah.
presenting to um, largely corporates, right, that were going to mining companies that were going to donate money to Teach and Grow, really taught me a lot of core skills about how to get into consulting. And I think our consulting interviews were much better because of that. But also, I never obviously worked in consulting after the internship we did together, but also the fundraising we do now for our companies. I think a lot of those skills are very transferable as well. It's the sort of thing that happens in life that was a bit random, like we both kind of fell into it, right?
Yeah.
And then seems to have like quite a big impact on where your life goes. Yeah, which is kind of funny. Baz, was there anything you wanted to talk about, potentially unrelated to these previous topics, or anything you want to plug as well, like where people can find you guys?
Yeah, so you can find us online at www.usevulcan.app. We Now that we've got a first version of our product, we are rolling it out to early access users. We are raising some more money. So if you're interested in that, chat to me. But otherwise, no, I had a really fun time, Dave. It was good.
Like I've invested in Vulcan and your business, and I think there's a huge opportunity here, super exciting. So if anyone is, in the investment community, do check them out. Definitely worth checking it out. And
Exactly.
thanks for joining, Baz. I've enjoyed it. Thanks everyone for listening. Please remember to like, share, subscribe. So thanks everyone for joining today.